got to tell you, that's a much nicer reception than I got in the European Parliament earlier this week. Where I said they were creating an updated form of communism where they control every aspect of our lives, and they stood and they booed and they jeered and they hated me. Do you know why? Because the truth hurts sometimes. And unbelievable. I've travelled all over the world, giving speeches, joining campaigns. In fact, I've been on this mission now for 27 years. So I've been doing this for longer than most of you have actually been alive. And I did feel old this week because I remember the moon landings, which does make me pretty old. But all over the world, wherever I've been, I guess one of my trademarks that's been useful to me is having a very unusual surname. There really aren't many Farages in the world, which according to Theresa May is a very good thing. But for the first time ever, anywhere in the world, there is somebody tonight in the audience with my surname, with the same spelling. He's running for office in a few weeks' time in Grand Rapids. It's Michael Farage. That's pretty remarkable. Michael, pleasure to meet you, and don't get too famous. They give you a hell of a hard time, I promise you. I've got good news for you. Yay. But I've also got bad news for you. Yay. The good news is we are winning. The bad news is it doesn't always feel like it. Let's just cast our minds back to the sheer enormity that 2016 represents. You know, when you go to school, there are big dates that stand out, aren't there? I guess 1776 is a fairly big one here. Yes, all right, I know, you got rid of us, I understand it. You threw off your colonial oppressors and you decided you wanted to be an independent country. But governed yourselves, had your own constitution, had your own identity, and from that you've become the greatest country the world has ever known. And in some ways, what I'm trying to do with my country, now we may be smaller than you, but our achievements, if you think about it, have been pretty remarkable. And we are still a great nation. And what I'm trying to do is much the same thing that you set off in 1776. I don't want my laws to be made in Brussels. I don't want to have open borders with 500 million Europeans. I believe in national democracy, not globalist bureaucracy. But I believe, just as you guys learn about that great date at school, I believe that in years to come, 2016 will be a standout date that all children at school will learn and they will understand, because it was the date the world changed. Now normally social trends, economic trends, they come across the Atlantic and we kind of pick up on this stuff a year or two after you. But I think we can say with some confidence that in 2016 we set the trend for the big global change, and we did it on the 23rd of June, when in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of my nation, and despite being told by all the big global businesses despite being told by most of mainstream media, despite being told by our major political parties, despite being told by President Obama, who of course flew over to London to say that if we voted Brexit, we would go to the back of the line. I mean, fancy saying that. Fancy saying that about the nation with whom you've stood side to side over the last 100 years at the loss of millions of lives to defend liberty and freedom all over the world. And that was what Obama said when he came to our country. I was disgusted. But the good thing is, so were the British people. And it helped us win. But despite all of those things, and having campaigned for this for a quarter of a century, against all odds, we voted Brexit. And it was just the most remarkable thing. Now, 3 years on, we've got some problems, and I'll come back to those in a moment. But for me, having set myself against the entire establishment, having campaigned for this for so many years that I thought at times I might just become the patron saint of lost causes, but I kind of kept on going. And for me, it was a great thing. I thought we'd done it. I thought the government would listen to us and carry it through, and it allowed me a little bit of free time. And so with that free time, I thought, well, I know where I'm going to go. I am going to go to the United States of America. I want to witness this phenomenon of this man called Donald Trump. And little did I know when I went to the convention at Cleveland and had such a great time, little did I know that a few weeks later I would find myself in Mississippi, in Jackson, and I'd been asked to go along and speak at a dinner. The governor, Phil Bryant, was there. Donald Trump was there. Would I go along and speak at a dinner and explain to the audience how we beat the opinion pollsters, we beat the naysayers, we managed to mobilise people out there to give them some hope, and that maybe the Brexit message could be useful because Trump was facing very similar opposition. So I was very honoured to be at this dinner and to share the table with the man who is now your 45th president, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. And I was really excited because after that, it was off to the basketball stadium. 18,000 people who'd been queuing since 6 o'clock that morning to see Trump. And I was really excited because I was going to be there. I was going to witness a Trump rally, and I was milling around backstage and very excited. About 10 minutes to go before the event started. And Stephen Miller, who was then working for Senator Sessions, is now, of course, Trump's main speechwriter. Stephen Miller comes across and says, Nigel, he says, you did a great job of that dinner, great job. He says, the boss wants you to speak. I said, what? No, he said, the boss wants you to speak at the rally. I said, whoa, hang on a second. With that, over comes Trump. Nigel, great job, great job. He says, this crowd, they're just going to love you. Thanks so much for doing this. And turns around and walks away. So with absolutely zero preparation, I'm suddenly standing, and Trump's here at the lectern, and I'm kind of standing here, and within a few minutes, I'm going up there in front of 18,000 Mississippians. I think it was, and I don't get nervous easily, and I quite enjoy a good fight. It was one of the few times of my life I actually felt nervous. But looking back on it, I was very, very proud to go on that platform, despite the huge abuse I took at the time in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. And I came back during the campaign. I came back for the debates. I took part, giving an international view and perspective, whether it was on Fox News or CNN or wherever it was. And so I felt very, very invested in that Trump campaign. And when the 8th of November came around, when the Huffington Post told us that morning there was a 98.1% chance that the blessed Hillary was going to win. Yeah, hey, no more chance of lock her up. Chanting's a bit less popular this week than it's been in the past. The President agrees with that too. And I mean, just to see, and it was the picture. It was the faces of the commentators on CNN as it became obvious that Trump was going to win, that I think for me was the crowning moment of 2016. It was amazing. It was wonderful. And I was very privileged. I am the only human being on earth who took place publicly in both the Brexit campaign and the Trump campaign, and I'm enormously proud of what I was able to do in that year. It was amazing. But 3 years on, there are some big lessons for us to understand and learn. In both cases, the establishment was so shocked and so stunned that they simply couldn't believe this had happened without some massive level of outside interference. So they decided that it must be the Russians. Clearly it was the Russians. This couldn't have happened. This earthquake couldn't have happened without the Russians. And just look at it. You know, I mean, Mueller, it went on for the best part of 2 years, didn't it? Endlessly. And now this Wednesday, there's going to be another set of hearings, another set of the old rubbish being dragged out. But the most important thing to understand from Mueller was the conclusion: no collusion. The collusion delusion simply wasn't true. Yet it reached such levels that the British ambassador to Washington, well, he's not anymore, is he? Sir Kim Darroch, you know, even he, in one of his messages back to Downing Street, said that Trump was probably involved with dodgy Russians, and this would bring his administration to crash and burn and end in disgrace. All of it baseless. We've seen the same on my side of the pond. A big backer of mine, British businessman Aaron Banks, you know, just publicly being accused again and again of taking Russian money. A huge investigation into him by the UK's Electoral Commission, which found absolutely no wrongdoing whatsoever. But not satisfied with that, they hand the file over to the National Crime Agency, who drag their feet, and it goes on for month after month after month. Parallels, I think, between what is happening in my country and what has happened in your country. Similarly, mainstream media. Why has no one mentioned the New York Times? What is wrong with you as an audience? I waited, I gave you the chance, and nothing. It's unbelievable. Come on, wake up at the back, for goodness sake. What is amazing about the New York Times or CNN?
It's amazing.
I'm not fighting against you. And we have the same in the United Kingdom with the BBC, our state broadcaster, who give us a daily negative diet of how desperately bad Brexit is going to be for the country. What is amazing is that actually, with a Labour Party as appalling as our one is in the United Kingdom, and with much of the Democrats in this country attempting to mimic the same extreme leftist, socialist, Marxist, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish type line, that such a mess are the opposition parties that I think mainstream media has decided that it itself will now become actually the opposition. So you've had the same thing here, the endless negativity of the CNNs, as we've had the endless negativity of the BBC. Another sector in our countries that is just unreconciled to this remarkable change that has happened, and by the way, it isn't just the UK with Brexit, it isn't just America with Trump. Think about Italy. Think about the rise of Salvini. Think about a brand new government that's been formed. I mean, isn't it remarkable? I did say to them in the European Parliament, in one of my, some of you may have seen my speeches in the European Parliament, and I'm always very helpful and very constructive when I get up there. But I said to them in one of my speeches, I said, I hope a new disease sweeps like a rash across the whole of the West, and we're going to call it nation-state democracy. And it's happening. But another set of institutions that is completely unreconciled to this change, that refuses to pursue objectivity, that in many cases abuses and misuses public money, that is failing the younger people of our nations by not teaching them critical thinking, by not saying, you as a young person, here's a problem. I'm not blaming you, by the way. It isn't your fault entirely. Well, it could be. According to your mates, it could be, but I don't know. But we're not even teaching critical thinking. We're not even saying, you make your own mind up which of these two solutions is the right one. Actually, what is happening in our colleges and our universities across America, across the United Kingdom, across much of the rest of Europe is an absolute travesty. It's a disgrace. Safe spaces. What the hell are safe spaces? Surely our young people should be exposed to ideas of all kinds. The idea that you don't expose a group of young people to an idea because it's extreme. What do we think? Our young people are stupid? If you expose our young people to ideas that are anti-democratic and extreme, do you know what they'll do? They will reject those ideas. And they will go for the right ideas and the sensible ideas. And I have to say, I found myself last year speaking at a few American universities, and I was at Maryland one evening, and I arrived, and the security detail said, oh, well, we're going to look after you, Mr. Farage. You know, there are some protests. Fine. I mean, to be honest, if I didn't get protests, I'd be a bit upset, really. But what was remarkable about the protests, it wasn't the students protesting, it was the lecturers and professors holding banners. Because apparently, if you don't agree with their point of view, you're somehow a neo-Nazi. I mean, it is utterly extraordinary, the levels of abuse that we've sunk to. But what is more serious than all of that is this very important point. Civilized democracy only works, only functions, if you have the loser's consent. Namely, you may not like the result of an election, but you accept the result of the election, and you say to yourself, next time round, I'm going to work hard for my side, I'm going to give money to my side, and we'll do our damnedest next time round to make sure that our side beats the last side. That is how democracy functions. But if the loser doesn't accept the result, if the loser tries to find some excuse, be it Russia or whatever it may be, if the loser simply does its utmost to frustrate the result or to stop the result, then you've got a problem. We are now over 3 years on in my country from us voting for Brexit. And yet the British Parliament seems to be absolutely hell-bent on preventing us having a clean break with the European Union. Indeed, many of them now think we should vote again.
No.
And allied to this lack of losers' consent is another phenomenon that I think is even more disturbing and even more worrying. The other side, in the UK and America, the other side believe that they have a moral superiority over us. The other side have convinced themselves that they are better, more virtuous, more humane beings than we are. History teaches us that when one group of people believe themselves to be superior to another group of people, they are actually prepared to act and behave in ways that go beyond the accepted norms. Just look at the level of not just verbal, but physical attacks that now take place against conservatives. Look at conservative politicians and activists in America and in my country being driven out of restaurants. I mean, in my case, actually one day a few years ago with my 2 young children, just having lunch in the local pub. By the way, being a libertarian, I like pubs. But this is a really disturbing development, and that links in to what is going wrong with the education system. It links in to what is going so much wrong with many parts of our mainstream media. This belief that they are morally superior to us, and that is why, allied with the deep state. Do you know, I tried for years to tell myself, I'm not going to talk about the deep state. This is simply conspiracy theory. Well, now I've seen it in action. You know, I know that the State Department, I know that the British Civil Service do not want these changes and reforms to happen. Despite all of this, we're winning. I proved this earlier on this year. Not being a career politician, once we got Brexit, once we'd been promised with the Prime Minister that she'd deliver it, I was happy to take a backward step in British politics. I believed that I'd done all that I could to change the future course and direction of my country. But as the 2 years went by, I realised I could no longer stand aside. As I began to realise that March 29th, the day we were supposed to leave the European Union, simply wasn't going to happen, I thought, I've got to do something about this. So I founded the Brexit Party, and within 6 weeks of founding that party, we won the European elections. We got 50% more votes than our nearest rivals. It wasn't just a victory, we absolutely smashed the establishment. And that shows you the appetite for Brexit is even stronger than it was 3 years ago, even if our parliamentarians don't accept it. And one of the consequences of that victory is that it basically guaranteed from that day that the abysmal British Prime Minister, Mrs. May, you're booing, crikey, we know her. The abysmal British Prime Minister resigned. That was our first victory. And it pretty much guaranteed that Boris Johnson will become our Prime Minister. Now Boris is now saying all the right things. He's saying that the next date upon which we're supposed to leave, which is the 31st of October, Halloween. So we're asking ourselves, trick or treaty, we'll find out. But Boris is saying all of the right things. Whether he's actually got the courage to see this through, I don't know. What I do know is that if Boris does choose to be brave, then with my support, he could call an election in a pact with me, win that election and deliver Brexit. That could be done. If he buckles to the pressure, if he buckles to the idea that he's got to keep the Conservative Party together, well, then I will have to take them on at the next general election, and I actually think that if Brexit is not delivered, I think the Brexit Party would win the next general election. But either way, I'm optimistic and I'm bullish about what's happening, just as I am here in this country. Do you know, one of the remarkable things about Donald Trump is that he made a series of promises to the American electorate in that campaign, and unlike nearly all the previous presidents who made a series of promises simply, cynically to get votes, Trump is doing his damnedest to carry out all of those promises, and I think restoring faith in the Democratic. I know sometimes his comments are a bit rich for the blood of some, but he is carrying out his promises. The American economy is growing at 3.1%. Average wages in certainly the flyover states are significantly higher than they were, and I genuinely think and believe Trump will win in 2020 with a bigger majority than last time around. You see, back to where I started, it sometimes doesn't feel like we're winning, because the attacks are constant, the attacks are vicious, they're unending. But when you study the empirical evidence, we are winning. The opinion polls here and in the UK and in Italy and elsewhere tell us that. But there is one big message I want to finish with, and this is a message directly aimed at young Americans for liberty. And by the way, what a great name for an organisation. What I've learned in the last 3 years is that just winning elections, even when you do it in the unlikeliest of circumstances, just winning elections isn't enough. The battle against people, where big business and big government gets together, where people get together who want to dominate everybody else, that battle has been going on almost since men and women were first on this planet. And the truth of it is that if you want to live in freedom, if you want to live in democracy, if you want to live in liberty, if you want to live where the nation state is actually the most important unit through which you make your laws and pay your allegiance, if you want to do this, you can't just win the odd victory. You actually have to wage a permanent revolution for those values. As soon as we stop, as soon as we step back, the other side will come and take that ground. There is something about human beings, something about bad human beings that always wants to control and make decisions on behalf of everybody else. So it isn't going to be in the long run veterans like me that decide whether you live in freedom and liberty. People like me can help create the conditions in which, for the moment, you can live in those conditions, but the burden is upon you. The burden is upon you to be politically active. The burden is upon you to go out and do all you can. The burden is upon you at state level and national level to make sure that you are represented by men and women who hold those values dear. And that battle will go on for all of you until your dying day. Freedom, democracy and liberty don't come for free. They perpetually have to be fought for. But what we've proved since 2016 is that the sensible majority of our countries want these things, will always want these things, and that actually this new wave of green Marxism will be no more than a flash in the pan. It can never achieve majorities if we're organised, if we're mobilised, if we have a smile on our faces, if we believe in our hearts what we do, we can win those great battles for the future. And I implore you, young people here today, get involved in this. It is enriching, and we are going to win, aren't we? Right, thank you very much. Look, I've left loads of time for comments, questions. You can pretty much say and do what you like. I would object to a milkshake being thrown, but okay, very good. Okay, one over there. Yes, sir.
Sir, we spoke this morning. Obviously, it's a great honor to have you here. But
you're the guy at Army College, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
I got you.
I was wondering if you would support countries such as Northern Ireland leaving the UK.
Well, we are a United Kingdom. I don't support Northern Ireland leaving the United Kingdom unless that is what the people of Northern Ireland wish to do. I think this principle of national self-determination is actually very, very important. And it's interesting, isn't it, that one of the arguments for the EU, one of the arguments the globalists have, and I mean, don't forget, had Hillary won the election, she was all for America joining what she called a hemispheric common market. She was all for America linking up with a single European market. The globalists argue that to survive in the modern world, you have to be part of a big country. Actually, many parts of the world are breaking down into smaller units. And much as America as a big country is doing well, look at little countries like Singapore, little countries like New Zealand. You haven't got to be big to be successful. And the idea that we, as the 5th biggest economy in the world, the idea that we should throw away our independence, our liberty and our freedom just to be part of some big club run currently by some bloke from Luxembourg who can barely speak after lunch every day. I mean, it's just totally extraordinary. So I respect national self-determination. I believe nations are what we want to be part of. Nations are where we wish to be governed. Nations have flags, anthems and symbols, and nations have legitimacy. If the people of Northern Ireland wish to change their future, they can freely do so, but I don't believe they do. And talking of flags and anthems, this European Union, without ever asking anybody, now has flags and anthems. And when the European Parliament sat for the first time on July the 2nd, as they played that piece of Beethoven, everyone there stood ramrod straight to attention, apart from the 29 Brexit Party MEPs, and we turned our backs. And I don't respect the legitimacy of it. The Irish question is difficult. The border between the Republic and the North was a question that was thrown up by the EU's chief negotiator, Monsieur Barnier. I think he sort of thought to himself, how do I pose a question to which there isn't an answer? If I can do that, I can stop Brexit. And our idiot Prime Minister signed up to it, and we've been in trouble ever since. The truth of it is, there is going to be no return to terrorism, no return to the bad old days, no need for a hard border. The relationship between the Republic of Ireland and the UK is a unique one. It operates across that border on the principle of live and let live, and that is how it needs to continue. Thank you.
Hi, big fan of yours, by the way. So, if you and the Brexit Party would win, would you repeal the 1997 Handgun Ban Act in regard to the police so the knife crime in London stops eventually or finally?
Well, there's no direct evidence that arming the police would stop knife crime. But I'll tell you what it would do. When some drugged up maniacs intent on radical jihad drive over London Bridge, kill some people, crash the van. This happened 2 years ago. Yeah. That they get out of the car with these big machetes and they go into Borough Market and start killing people there. There was a police officer on duty. Very, very brave lad. And all he had was an extendable truncheon. All right, so he took these guys on. He got stabbed in the eye, stabbed somewhere else. He lived and survived. In a situation like that, if he'd been armed with a handgun, even if he'd been armed with a taser, he would have stopped that terrorist attack dead in its tracks. And I think it is absolutely ridiculously out of date, given the threats the world faces, for the British police force not to be using, at a minimum, tasers. We've only got 7,000 armed officers in the whole of the country. In the end, the armed squad came to Borough Market. Within seconds, all the terrorists were killed. They should have been killed before they even entered Borough Market and caused further fatalities. There are many similarities between us and you, many similarities. There are differences. Attitudes towards guns are different, but the idea that the Olympic team have to go to France to even practice when, a handgun could be held securely in a club or whatever it is clearly absolutely ludicrous. But that's knee-jerk legislation. We had an horrendous massacre at Dunblane. It took place a few years ago, and the answer was to ban everything. The answer is not just to ban everything. The answer is to think sensibly about what are the solutions. But now on the police issue, I do a radio show on LBC, 5 days a week, and it's an issue that keeps coming back. Knife crime in London is on the increase, but knife crime is on the increase in Birmingham and in Manchester. Serious crime is massively on the increase in my country, and we have a mayor of London in the shape of Sadiq Khan, who seems to be keener on attacking Donald Trump and other people than actually dealing with the problems. I was shocked when I checked a few months ago. He had not visited a single murder scene, and he had not spoken to a single one of the victims' families. And I contrast that with what the remarkable Rudy Giuliani did in New York all those years ago. Where with the broken windows theory, the zero tolerance policy, he radically changed crime in New York and changed the perception of New York for us as Brits and everybody else. Sadiq Khan is not doing a good job. The British police are not being allowed to do a good job, and I've been campaigning for change, and I will go on campaigning for that change. Absolutely. Thank you.
Farage, thank you for all you've done for making a win in the UK. I actually have a sister that lives there, and my question is, how do we help all the other European countries that are still in their leftist ideals, that really haven't been able to wake up, or have the small communities that haven't been able to really break out and make a difference for their people too?
Yeah, what's happened here is the European Union has built up such incredible power that countries are scared. They're now scared to break free. It's almost like Stockholm syndrome, isn't it? You're kidnapped by somebody, and even though they've deprived you of your liberty, because they feed you, you think, well, if I walk outside the door with no money, I might starve. so I may as well stay kidnapped and stay with my... It's that kind of thing that's gone on. I'm absolutely with you in that sentiment. One of the things that's often said is, Farage is anti-European. But I'm not. I love Europe. I love Europe. I work for a French company for a bit. I married a German woman. My kids are bilingual. I've drunk more Spanish wine than almost anybody alive on the planet. I love Europe. But what I love about Europe is the fact that you've got these, in very short geographical spaces, you've got these remarkable different cultures. Different languages, different cheeses, different people, different customs. I want to see a Europe of different peoples, living under democracy, living at peace with each other, trading with each other. The idea that the whole of Europe should be bundled up into one is, I think, pretty objectionable. So no, I am dedicated not just to getting the UK out of the European Union, I'm dedicated to getting Europe out of the European Union, which masquerades in its name a Europe of democratic nation states will be a damn sight better than where we are today. It really, really will. I'll try a joke on you. It might work, it might not. But the idea was that Europe would make us all happy with each other. And you might have seen that the Greeks joined the euro. It's been a catastrophe for them. Their economy has declined by 26% since 2008. If you go back to the darkest days of the Depression in America, buddy, can you spare us a dime? That was a 16% fall. It's now a 26% fall. And the Greeks say nasty things about the Germans, and the Germans say nasty things about the Greeks. Little joke, I'll see if it works. Chap arrives at Athens airport, German tourist arrives at Athens airport, goes up to passport control, puts his passport down. The Greek officer looks at it, looks at the German, and says, "Occupation?" The German says, "No, I'm just here on holiday." The idea that if you force Europe against its will to be run by bureaucrats in Brussels, that everyone's going to love each other is nonsense. The reason they argue for this, and this matters, so the reason they've argued for a European Union is because the French and Germans kept fighting each other. Right? 1870, the Germans invade. 1914, the Germans invade. 1940, the Germans invade. I asked the Strasbourg restaurateur once, I said, do you get many Germans here? All we said, they pop by once every 25 years or so. Back to a serious point, all right? I've been told by the bosses I've got to behave. I find it very difficult. Here's the serious point. 2 world wars precipitated by that Franco-German enmity. All right? And so after the war, just as Woodrow Wilson, after the First World War, designed the League of Nations, after the Second World War, the United Nations was developed, as was the European Economic Community. The argument was that because of the existence of nation states, that meant nationalism, and nationalism meant war. And therefore the theory went, if you abolish the nation state, there'll be no more aggression, there'll be no more war. Actually, if you take away from people their independence, their ability through the ballot box to change their futures, you're actually more likely to stir up internecine strife and civil war than not. But here was the fault. It isn't the existence of nation states that leads to war. It's when democracy breaks down in nation states that they can behave badly. There is no example of one mature, functioning democracy going to war with another mature, functioning democracy. Please, everybody, think about that. It matters as a point. What we should have gone for in post-1945 Europe was cooperation, trade, reciprocity, being good neighbours, but doing so with a model of democratic functioning nation states, not an undemocratic, monstrous bureaucracy based in Brussels.
Amen.
We got the whole thing wrong.
Mr. Farage, you were gracious enough when you were passing by the hallway to stop and shake my hand. I really appreciate that.
That's because you had a Ron Paul badge on.
That's exactly what I
I've got to tell you, I watched what Ron Paul was doing. He was an early trailblazer, wasn't he? Using the internet, doing the Daily Paul, and I learned so much from Ron Paul about message communication, about using the internet, and I was honoured to spend some time with him and his wife, having lunch with them and dinner with them a couple of years back. And the son, Rand, is a good friend of mine. If ever I go to DC and I don't go in to see Rand, he's really, really hacked off with me. So so it was partially your looks that I spoke to you for, but it was really the Ron Paul badge.
Well, I appreciate that. I just wanted to say my father was absolutely astounded at the fact that I was going to be able to see you, and he wanted me to let you know that he thinks you're awesome. My question is, we have our way of being libertarians here in America based off of our history, based off our Constitution, and you've been speaking about how you're an advocate for liberty. Can you describe how, I guess, libertarianism works for you as a citizen of Great Britain? What is the difference between how you view liberty as a Brit?
Well, I've got a classic view of it. You know, I've got the John Stuart Mill view of liberty. You know, which is the freedom to pursue the freedom to pursue what you want to do, provided it doesn't cause harm to others. And I just think the desire of government to get involved in every single aspect of our lives, I find it truly and utterly repulsive. And I find the whole globalist agenda of big politics, big business, big supranational organisations, those organisations will take away every single little aspect of our personal freedom. I do think overall we're fighting a hell of a battle. You know, this country is just as overregulated as my country. You know, where is the freedom? Not just for people to make personal choices, although I did find it amazing in these states where cannabis has now been legalised, and if people want to do that, that's fine. But you know, if I light up one of these, I mean, you think I've sort of committed some terrible, awful, terrible crime? I was in Colorado, and you couldn't smoke in the restaurant, and you couldn't smoke outside the restaurant. You had to be 25 feet away from the door of the building, and the middle of the street wasn't 25 feet away from the building. I mean, the whole thing was nuts. More seriously, I think there are elements here of economic freedom that matter too. That the desire to regulate business at every level, and particularly if it's in the aim of health and safety, the environment. These are all very worthy things, but you finish up with giant cartels running many businesses, with it very, very difficult for the small man and woman to get involved in business and to compete with medium and large sized firms. When the left say they're against capitalism, I don't think we're living in a system of capitalism. I think we're living in an age of corporatism, where big businesses control. Where big businesses control far too much of our lives. I mean, the giant multinationals love the EU. They love it because they regulate every sector to death, and the higher the cost of entry into a business, the more the cartel keeps its market share, and that means the consumer gets higher prices and fewer choices. And I think the big libertarian battle for the next decade isn't so much about personal lifestyle choices, it is actually about economic libertarianism and the recreation of a capitalist society where men and women feel they can go out, compete and do their own thing. I really believe that. So,
hello, Mr. Farage. I'm a big fan. I've watched you since 2015.
well, that's a good start.
About the Brexit Party in general, and when you take back Britain, how will you and the Brexit Party regulate trade with the fellow European nation and basically everyone else, but more concernedly the European nation? How will that work? Will there be tariffs? How will you do it?
Well, before getting involved in politics, I was in business. I worked in the commodities sector for 20 years, very briefly for a French firm, as I mentioned earlier. They did sack me, but hey, that's just one of those things.
Their loss.
Well, do you know why they sacked me? Insubordination. Oh, no. Which kind of fits, doesn't it, really? Actually, I spent most of my career, I spent 18 years working for American companies. So I've been regularly visiting the States since the late 1980s. Look, as somebody involved in that business, you know, I don't like to see tariffs between competitors if they're both playing off a relatively level playing field. And that's because in those circumstances, you actually get more competition. It's back to the previous answer. And in that environment, you get more technological innovation, you get more consumer choice, you get lower prices. It can be a win-win situation. Where it's different, and where Trump has a serious point, is where, for example, China decides it will just dump steel on the Western world in a bid to close down steel production in the West at a loss leader cost to itself just to gain market share. So there are circumstances in which you say, hey, whoa, we're not having this. There's also a strategic argument that without steel, it's very difficult as a nation to defend yourself or an extremist wage war. So generally, you know, I tend towards the pro-business argument that there are benefits in these things. So for 25 years, I've wanted us to have a simple free trade deal with our European friends and neighbours. It is now too late for that. The negotiations have got to a point where we face a choice. Either signing up to a new treaty, whose terms arguably are even worse than the current membership of the European Union, or leaving with no deal, leaving on WTO terms. My worry about Boris is this. This is my worry. When she came back with an appalling document, the worst deal in history is how the Brexit Party branded it, because we never like to understate things, you understand. And twice it went before the House of Commons, and twice Boris voted against it, saying it would lead to us becoming a vassal state, a slave state. It was a disaster. On the third time that treaty was presented, Boris voted for it, despite all the things he'd said before. So I just don't know whether Boris has got the guts to do this. We must leave on the 31st of October. If we don't do that, we have fundamentally broken faith and trust with the British people in the whole democratic system in our nation. And given that the current agreement means handing over $50 billion to this bunch, let's leave with no deal on the 31st of October, not pay them a penny. Right now, no deal is better than a bad deal. We get back our sovereignty, and that's the point. And people say, well, Nigel, what if we're worse off? Well, I think we'd be better off. But even if we were worse off, what price freedom? What price democracy? What price liberty? That's what this battle is all about. And we are going to win it. Where's the microphone got to? Where's the microphone?
Right here.
Sorry, yeah, couldn't see it.
What do you think is important for the American people to understand about Tommy Robinson?
Well, look, Tommy Robinson is seen by some here and in the UK as being something of a working class hero. All right? You know, he's somebody that can make a good YouTube video and look fairly credible. He's somebody that says some things about the blind eye that's been turned in British society to female genital mutilation and many other abuses. All right? And all of that's fine. The problem is he is not the right person to be the poster boy for the right. He's been to prison on 4 separate occasions for 4 separate charges, one of which was attempting to enter America using a false passport. Did you know that?
Oh,
No, you didn't know that, did you?
no.
All right?
Give him free health
You know,
care.
and he is, I'm afraid, somebody that gets involved in public fisticuff, punch-ups. I'm afraid he's a bit of a lout. He's a bit of a yob. That's my view. Brave he may be in many, many ways, but he is not the right person to be the poster boy of the right. He puts off more people than he attracts. We need better role models than Tommy Robinson, and I believe in that very, very strongly. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all the work that you've done and for saving your country to the best of your ability. Hopefully they find spines and Brexit does happen.
It will.
So how do you feel about Marine Le Pen's efforts with Brexit?
I'm sorry to say that she sold out. You know, it's really back to the question I was asked the gentleman here earlier. You know, she was taking a firm line on it, but during the last European elections, she appeared to have softened much of it. She now wants France to stay part of the euro. Well, if you're part of the euro, you're run by the Germans. It's as simple as that. So I'm afraid that the might and the power of the European project, a lot of people walk up to the brink and then walk back again. The same happened in Greece. The left-wing leader Tsipras won the previous election saying, you know, we'd take on the Troika. And by the way, bad though the European Union is, the Washington DC based International Monetary Fund is in some ways even worse. And these guys threaten and they bully and they're getting their way. We are seeing a growth in Italy and elsewhere, and Marine Le Pen's votes are Eurosceptic, but she herself, I'm afraid, is not being as strong on this as I really think she ought to be. In time, the whole thing's going to fall to pieces. You know, what free people willingly give up the right to govern themselves? Think about the history of mankind, we don't do it. In the end, it'll all fall. I just hope that we, once we've had Brexit, give the example to everybody else. It was after the famous Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, when the Royal Navy took on the French fleet and won a great victory at a huge cost, that the Prime Minister, Pitt, said, England has saved herself through her exertions and Europe by her example. I hope the same thing happens in the 21st century. We've run out, the hour's gone. The last question, you better make it a good one.
It is a good one. Mr. Farage, you said a lot of positive and things you like about President Trump, and I was wondering what major disagreements you might have with him. Like what things you disagree on, either on U.S. domestic or foreign policy.
Do you know, people often ask me about Trump because I know him, and by the way, he's a friend. I get on very well with him. You know, I was the first foreigner to meet him 3 days after he won that election. I was in Trump Tower with him, and I saw him recently on his trip to London, where he had a great time. And wasn't it good to see that the first time he came, there were huge protests. This time, really a very small number of people turned up to protest. So he's beginning to win the arguments. Look, if you want to understand Donald Trump, And what his philosophy is, just look at the speech he gave to the United Nations last year. That speech, that 35-minute speech, outlines what Trump believes in. He believes in the nation state having primacy. He believes in democracy. He believes in politicians keeping their promises. He believes in trying to help small businesses with regulatory reform. He believes that trade should be free and fair if possible, but if it's not, to stop the bad guys from misbehaving. In fact, he believes in a strong military. He believes in pride of nation. In fact, just about every major tick against Donald Trump is a major tick against Nigel Farage. I agree with him on nearly all of the big stuff facing the world today. I agree with him on Iran. Absolutely. I say that as a British oil tanker is currently in the hands of the Iranian Guard, and yet my government and the European Union, along with Obama, sought to appease this disgusting regime that have been there for 40 years and behave like barbarians. My style and Donald Trump's style are different. Donald Trump's style is different to anybody that's ever been in politics, all right? He is what he is. But I'm not going to stand here and tell you what I disagree with him on, because actually it isn't very much. I had the guts to stand up and back him when everybody thought literally I'd gone mad. Support for me in Britain was lower than it had ever been, or anything I'd ever done. And do you know something? I'm very proud that I stood on that platform in Mississippi. I'm very proud I went to those debates. And if I helped in any way at all in helping get him elected, in spreading the Brexit message to America, then I'm enormously proud of any contribution that I might have made. Thank you.